those annoying wannabe YouTube personalities. Over the years, I've seen him cough out cinnamon, lay flat on the hood of his car as it slowly creeps down the driveway, and douse himself in lukewarm water, all while screaming, "Epic win, epic fail," or fuck, epic maintenance of the status quo, for all I know. It can get tiring watching him go about his shenanigans and the pursuit of viral fame. So when he knocked on my door the other day, told me he was going away for a few weeks, and asked him that I get his mail honestly, it was a relief. I can't explain the peace of mind I had knowing I didn't have to brace myself for any of his stupidity for a while. I was afraid his stunts would wind up bleeding over into my life. Things were pretty normal for the first couple of days. He received a few bills, a bit of spam, and what I could only presume was a birthday card. Then, one evening, I got home to find a cardboard box waiting on his front porch. In big red letters was written, "Return to sender." I'm no small fry, but I admit I had trouble lifting the box on my own. It was really freaking heavy. Lugging it across the road to my house was even harder. I quickly realized that there was no way I was going to drag up the stairs and through my front door. I decided I would leave this package in my garage. It wasn't like I kept it in there. The garage door was a piece of shit that refused to open without a good tug and a whack. It was less trouble just leaving the car in the driveway than it was to fight the garage door every morning and night. In hindsight, I should have set the package down while I struggled to open the tricky door. But you know how it is when you got a good grip on something. No point in setting it down if you don't have to. As I kicked the door for a third time, I lost grip on the package and it fell on the ground. I heard a light crack inside. Shit, I cursed. I hope I hadn't broken anything important, but I figured I just would tell my neighbor about it and let him assume the break happened en route. Hands-free, I finally managed to open the garage door, and boy did it screech in protest as it rolled up and over me. I dragged the box the rest of the way, setting it in a corner for whenever my neighbor would come back to claim it, and then I forgot all about it until a few days, that is. I'm not sure how long it took for me to for the smell to waft in from the crack under the garage to the house door, but it still came in a slow progression. It was sticky, sweet odor, similar to a skunk, and for the first few days after I smelled it, I genuinely assumed that's exactly what it was. Roadkill that had left its mark on my house. It was only when I realized the scent was growing more intense instead of fading that I went looking back for a source. That's when I opened the garage door, and when the odor knocked me back, holding my nose. The culprit wasn't hard to identify. The only change in my garage was the box in the corner. The meat must have gone rancid from being left out of the fridge for so long. How much meat could have been there for the box to have been so large and heavy? An entire frickin' cow. I covered my nose as I approached the box, a pair of scissors in my hand. I probably wouldn't have needed them to open it as soon as it became soggy enough at the bottom to poke through with a finger. But I wasn't about to poke my finger into spoiled meat juices. That soggy bottom was the reason I had to open the box in the first place. If I tried to drag it out whole, everything would spill onto the floor. I was going to have to dump the pieces of meat one garbage bag at a time and take them down to the dumpster, a process I was not looking forward to. My scissors tore through the tape along the top of a cardboard box. I thought the smell couldn't get any worse, but as soon as I flipped the flaps open, I discovered a whole new gamut of stink. It was like opening a burning oven, but instead of the heat wave, I was met with a wave of piss, sweat, shit, and putrefaction. It was so bad that I could have staggered back and had forced down the puke Every second that box lay in my garage was another second the smell was allowed to hold into my home. I had to bite the bullet. I returned to the garage, the flaps on the box still open, as though inviting me to look. I prepared a clothespin, pinning my nostrils shut, a garbage bag in one hand, the strongest cleaner I could find in the other, and the long rubber gloves to keep my skin from having to touch what was inside. But as it soon turns out, I needed none of those things. I wouldn't have touched or cleaned the contents of the box. I would only have to suffer the nightmares every night. You see, there was meat in the box, but it didn't come from a cow or a pig. No, it was worse than that. It was my neighbor, dead, still in one piece, but dead. I called the cops, and naturally they took me in for interrogation. It's kind of hard not to suspect the man with the corpse in his garbage after all. Thankfully, they soon realized I wasn't involved. My DNA could have been all over that box. The smell must have left a mark throughout my house. But there was one piece of irrefutable evidence in my neighbor's own hands that proved my innocence: a vlogging camera. They showed me the footage only once. I'm not sure if they were allowed to or they felt so bad for me. They figured it couldn't hurt. Either way, I saw it. My neighbor was sitting in the box of the shipping facility laughing as he told the world now he was going to mail himself across state lines. He had bought pee bottles, food, a pillow, and a few flashlights. His friend, a guy I've seen at his place several times to help him with his stunts, closed the lid and presumably dropped him off for shipment. Throughout the next couple of days, hours or days, I'm not sure, my neighbor recorded a few short clips about his progress. I think I'm in a truck now. I can feel it moving. Must have been in a warehouse. Pretty warm here. Still got plenty of food, that kind of stuff. And then on the last entry, the box toppled over. He broke his neck. That was it. The cameras recorded until either the memory card got too full or the battery died. There's one thing I didn't tell the police after they showed me the video. One thing I heard in the footage that will haunt me until the day I died. Just after the tumble that broke his neck, I heard the familiar screeching sound of my garage door. Wow. Yeah, that was pretty scary, because it turned out he killed his neighbor, so that was a great twist at the end. Good story. It's called NASA is Trying to Kill Me. Okay, my name is Dr. Adrian Reinhardt, and I'm the last surviving member of the Kronos Project team under the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. You've never heard about me or the project because all intents and purposes we do not exist. But I'll be damned if NASA is going to let my colleague's death be nothing more than just a classified folder collecting dust on a shelf. I know as a discount version of the Mission Control Facility in Houston. We were all there at our desks going over sheets of useless data from other reconnaissance scans until the detection alarm started to go off, signifying that there had been a signal detected from deep space. When we started going over the data, we triangulated the signal source to RA14H 50M 0 seconds, December plus 49 degrees 00. For those not versed in stellar coordinates, it pointed right smack dab in the middle of the void. Given the vast, empty region of space we were at first had, it was a system malfunction. But when we restarted it, it became immediately reporting a signal coming from those coordinates. Once again, we had originally thought we had just picked up fragments of supernova, stellar burst, or long dead star that had been in the search of space. But the hypothesis was quickly uprooted when we were able to filter through the background data and convert it into an audio format. But it wasn't one long waves of static that you would normally detect from a cosmic event. It was a continuation, rhythmic series of bleeps that sounded like a heartbeat. Now, of course, we were millions of miles away, confirming or denying that the signal was the work of absolute ecstatic over the finding. I don't remember seeing a single one of the faces, and they're not smiling from ear to ear, while I was beating, pulsing signal repeated itself over and over again through the speakers of the control center. Following our eureka moment, we followed the proper procedures and contacted our administrators and awaited further instructions as we aimed every satellite and listening device we had at our disposal at those coordinates. I remember feeling like a little kid on Christmas Eve, and I was driving home that night, so impossibly eager to see what the next day would bring. And fortunately, those days would roll into months, then into years, and then to the next chapter of the ongoing cosmic heartbeat signal would present itself. On August 24th, 2009, we were given the go-ahead by the Obama administration to send a reply signal into the same region of the void that was a signal that was coming from them. Although this was mainly done as a ceremonial milestone, given the fact that the region of space was nearly 700 million light years away, it would be at least 1,400 million years for a reply to our message would even reach to us. Given that the message was still a continuous repetition of 2 beats per second, we decided to use a similar frequency using a Morse code translation of hello. We popped some champagne and enjoyed the event as much as one could in a top secret research facility under a shadow section of the United States government. That night, at around 3 a.m., I received a call from Dr. Westcott concerning at the signal. I'll never forget how disappointed and yet terrified his voice was over the phone. The signal, he said, it just stopped. For years, that seemed to be the end of our little interstellar communications, but we still carried on with our research, always keeping at least one monitoring device locked on the targeted coordinates of the void. We had a few dedicated bursts of information that piqued out interest at the time from the other regions of space, but nothing like heartbeat signal. I wish I could tell you that's where the story ended, but I wish I could stay. That rather than typing this out at the last few hours of my life ticked away, that I was back into this facility searching the stars, but these are the wishful thoughts of a man at the end of his rope. It's that time I've come to realize that there are no happy endings. 8 months ago, while I was going through with the routine series of scans, we received yet another transmission from the BOD's void. One I'm still trying to come to terms with, not because it was began again, but because it defied the very laws of physics. This was the message, translated in Morse code. Goodbye. It was a reply to the message we sent nearly 11 years ago. Somehow communication that could have transpired over the course of 1400 million years took place in just 11. It didn't make any sense. It still doesn't. None of what was happening made any logical sense. But that wasn't even the ridiculous part. As soon as the transmission was received and translated, the empty space around the center of the void began to expand as the surrounding stars seemed to just blink out of existence, one by one, like a series of light bulbs being turned on. The stars began to go out. It was almost as if we were watching it occur in real time, which was another yet astronomical impossibility. You see, we can only observe as fast as light travels, which means if we're watching the beauty's void that is 700 million light years away, we would be seeing it as it was 700 million light years ago. But now we were watching an event unfold that was absolutely cosmically impossible. The rate at which the stars were vanishing was expanding the void at a rate of nearly 5 million light years a minute. I don't know how to describe it other than saying that the dark nothingness was growing faster than the speed of light itself, seemingly consuming and extinguishing everything in its path. All the while, the messages just kept ringing throughout the room. I don't know why or how, but very quickly the implications of this flooded over to the control center as my colleagues and I began to realize the gravity of this impossible event. There was no argument against us whether this was not possible or not. It clearly wasn't. Yet it was all happening at the same time. At this rate, it'll reach the solar system in a little under a year. Dr. Waterford sounded weak and hoarse. He exclaimed the obvious. We were all thinking the same big thing. In a little under 360 days, this cosmic expanse would reach our very own solar system. As we, of course, didn't know what would happen when it did, but in astronomy, you always think of the worst. If the sun was somehow extinguished by the void, all of the surrounding stars, it would take a little under a year for the Earth to become an uninhabitable wasteland. That, of course, even if the planet wasn't completely consumed and absorbed into nothingness as well. The entire time I ran the calculations and possible scenarios in my head. The message we kept receiving popping up and again, seemingly trying to answer the question as to what was going on. Goodbye. It seemed to hit Dr. Redmond first as he leapt his feet and made for a dashing sprint to the exit. Soon everyone began to follow. Under normal circumstances, you would think that the man's cheese had finally slid off his metaphorical crackers. But given the situation, given what we were witnessing, we may not have made the sensible one in that entire room. Then, just as a few others were making their ways to the exit, it suddenly dawned on me as well. The message it must have been telling us and everyone else in its path. Goodbye. Well, whatever was in the booty's void was coming for us, coming for everything. At the time, we weren't really thinking of the consequences of our was the sweeping wall of nothingness hurtling towards us than the speed of light, faster than the speed of light. I went home and drowned myself in the little bottle, hoping to wake up the next morning to realize everything was just some crazy dream. I wouldn't be so lucky, of course, and the truth I came to find out, that was very quickly. That night, at about 1 o'clock a.m., I was awoken by my phone. When I went to check the unknown caller, it turned out to be one of my colleagues, Dr. Maverick Burcham, who was one of the last men to leave the facility that day. "You've got to run, Adrian," he yelled, trying to catch his breath. I had wondered at the time what had caused such physical exertion. Whoa, what are you talking about?" I asked as my head pounded with a throbbing migraine. "They're scrubbing the project, cleaning the house. Don't you know what that means?" That first sentence was all I needed to sober up. If what he said was true, then word had gotten up to chain of command, and they had now come to knowledge about both the discovery and its implications, as well as science team's reaction to said implications. If they were scrubbing the project, then we would be the first to be cleaned up. "How do you know about this?" I asked. I tried to go over to Megayer's house to discuss the possible outcomes about the expansion. But when I got there, his house was burning to ashes. And Cuthbert and Lethbridge wouldn't answer their phones, and on top of that, I think I'm being followed. "Are you sure?" I asked them as I made my way to the bedroom window, search of any sign of government hitmen. "Yes, absolutely. I've driven around my block twice, and now I'm on 58 South. There's been a black, unmarked car following me the entire way." I could almost make out what were sniffles through the speaker. "Listen, you've got to get the hell out of there right now while you've still got a pot to piss in. If you're half as smart as I know it, then Those were the last words I heard from him. The signal gave out. I didn't need much more of a warning after that. I quickly got some things and piled up into my Avalon and hit more of the highway. I've been on the run ever since, dodging any sign of suspicion by moving state to state, country to country, all until now. Once I post this, they'll obviously be able to trace it, and I'm gonna let them. I've been running all year, and I'm tired of it. Mainly because there doesn't seem to be a point in any longer. Within a few months, the expanse will reach us anyways. So forgive me if I tried to take it the easy way out of this. I wish I could tell you in these final words that the government of the world are working together to somehow stop this. But they know better. They know it's coming. And rather than be upfront with you, they want to hide it as long as possible. That's why there's been so much shit clogging the news and media here lately. They want total blanket coverage, so much chaos here on Earth. There's no way no one looks up to this, see the inevitable. It's coming, and there's no stopping it. So do me a favor, will you? Make that little life of yours left worth it. Hold your loved ones. Go on that vacation. And keep putting it off. Do what makes you happy. Live. Goodbye. That was a good one. Especially during this time, it really got me thinking if it's true, because like all the news and everything. Anyway, next story. Okay, the next story is called "This Man had offered $5,000 to sit in a chair and stare at him." The ad offered $5,000 and said that the desired activity could be completed in an hour. It stated fairly redundantly that it was not a sexual thing, insisted that all the witness would need to sit in a chair and stare ahead. The only other details expressed were that a self-requested self-restraint, not through any means of physical prevention. Being an abysmally broke college student and having a friend with whom I could depend upon for my rescue if anything strange happened, I answered the ad only a few minutes after coming across it. The person who had put it out the ad had provided a phone number, which I called. Sending a text resulted in me in being informed that it was a landline. The person answered, and we briefly discussed the location where the interaction was to be held. I was confirmed the amount of money to be paid, like his ad. He repeatedly reminded me that there was no way, a car, no activity apparently. He had gotten a lot of answers to the ad from people with that particular preconception. My friend took the day off from work, insisted, despite my parents, that we could wait until the following day, when he was off. When we drove to the agreed upon location, it was a house in a suburban neighborhood, which was somewhat comforting. If the man was an axe murderer, there was a chance my screams of terror could be heard by quite a few people. I joked aloud about this, but my friend didn't find it funny. The ad specified, and the man reiterated that I had to be alone when entering the house, so I had my friend stay in the car. Being similarly broke, I offered him $500 for his help, an unnecessary incentive, his words, to leave me if the man turns out to be truly insane. I got out of the car and walked across the lawn, which, unlike those other houses, hadn't been maintained. The grass was high. Weeds threatened to burst out of the concrete of the driveway and sidewalk. The man had sounded fairly old on the phone, so I attributed to the ill-maintained property to be an inability to perform his duties rather than some indication of insanity. I was instructed to immediately enter once I had arrived, so I didn't bother knocking. The unlocked door opened into a foyer, and connected to this was a hall that led into a kitchen. The hall held a single door, which I assume led into a closet or down to a basement. Leftward from the kitchen was a spacious room, devoid of all furniture save for two steel foldable chairs and an equally foldable diner table. The foyer, hall, and kitchen were in similar states of bareness, and not worth remarking on beyond that. Sitting in one of the chairs in the great room was a man who I knew at once to be the dealer of the ad. There was certain familiarity about him. One of those times when a voice is almost an eerie reflection of the person from whom it's issued. He nodded and gave a wave, but it did not speak. I approached and sat down at the chair opposite him. To my left on the dinner table was a box. On top of the box was a clear case, through which a neat stack of money could be seen. The base of the box was black, and with a timer at its base, and a collapsing mechanism when sealed the upper portion to the bottom. It's a time-release device. Now that you're here, I will start it, he immediately does, and once an hour had passed from this point, the box will open, and you're free to take your payment. You needn't say anything once the time arrives, and can depart a slightly richer person. Now, all you must do is look at me. You may, of course, blink, but please don't speak or look away. It is important that you both silent and still. And so the starting session began. It was expectedly awkward for the first few minutes, and he stared right back at me. But after a while, the oddness of the circumstances became dull, and I grew accustomed to them. His face wasn't unusual, but it wasn't exactly handsome. Easy enough to look at, but not someone you would have necessarily wanted to linger on without incentive. He was about 65, gray-haired and thin, face starting to sag, blue eyes slightly squinting, usual activity no doubt dwindling, visual activity no doubt dwindling. Okay. Despite his innocent assertions to the contrary, I can help but think that he derives some abstract sexual amusement from this, some sort of staring into the eyes of your lover thing. But despite the incredibly weirdness of the experience had doubled. From below and then far behind me, I heard a shifting clamor, as if a group of people had ascended the basement stairs and gathered just before the kitchen. Chatting excitedly, I was going to turn. The ad hadn't mentioned the presence of others, but the man's eyes seemed to almost plead with mine to remain focused on him. He didn't speak a word, though. Resisting instinct, I kept my gaze fixed on him and listened to the sound of the crowd behind me. The weird thing was that while I could hear them talking, and even mentally differentiate between speakers, I couldn't understand a single word that was spoken. They had moved into the kitchen by this point, but none of the words were intelligible to me. And even weirder was the obvious that they were speaking English. I could not recognize the nonsense structure of the language. The man's eyes imparted nothing beyond the unspoken sentence that I kept on him. My inability to recognize the words, which were clearly English, troubled me greatly, and I started saying words in my head to reassure myself that I had not somehow forgotten the language. I couldn't check exactly how much time had passed, the timer being far too out of my peripheral vision, but about 40 minutes into the experience, the voices were right behind me in the great room. There were perhaps 12 distinct voices, all chattering and laughing and speaking some unrecognizable variances of a language I had speaking nearly for 2 decades. Women, men, and children conversed just behind me, not a single one, for even a moment, being understandable. I was terrified. Their appearance and migration from the basement to the right behind me was strange, yes, but the possibility that something was wrong with me, that I might have some sort of stroke or neurological slip-up, was far worse. My eyes had stayed on the man, but my mind had momentarily receded, turning over these bleak possibilities. Upon returning my focus to the man, I saw that he was crying, inaudibly, of course, but the tears were there. The lips slightly quivering. Instinct almost compelled me to ask what was wrong, but I stopped myself, both for the sake of the experience and a fear that something would somehow draw the attention of the partiers to me. And for some inexpressible reason, I was sure that getting their attention wasn't something I wanted. A new terror dawned me. Then, what if the group continues their movement and they press forward, swarming around us? With each second that passed, I grew more certain that seeing these people would cause something horrible to happen. Their voices did grow louder, but no closer in proximity. I started to shake, my heartbeat quickened, but my breathing became labored. I tried to calm myself, but the presence of those people behind me was so dreadful in a way that I still can't find the words to properly describe. Against my control, as I shuddered, I let out a low moan. It was barely audible, more of a release of air than a proper emission of vocal cords. But the man's eyes grew wide with terror, and from behind me for the first time I heard something I could understand. Oh, would someone like to join the party? I froze in place, even my heart seemed to quiet its movement. The noise behind me still continued, but with considerably less people causing it. The attention of several members had apparently been drawn from the conversation, drawn to me. I became like a statue, not allowing myself to blink. The man's eyes remained widened, but he had stopped crying. He stared at me for what I can only describe as mindless terror. Despite my earlier belief that seeing these people would bring out some horrible event, I tried to see within his eyes as a dim reflection of the scene behind me, but nothing was reflected. Not even his thoughts. I could have sworn I heard a request to join the party, a woman's voice. Or was that one of the dear old dad's friend? A man's voice. Ha! That fool couldn't keep a friend and his life depended on it. You two sure saw that. A third voice, another man. a chorus of disconcerting laughter erupts. Oh well, shall we go back downstairs? The others hadn't spoken, seemed to respond in agreement, although I couldn't understand them. As gradually as they came, their voices went away, returning downstairs and eventually fading to inaudibility. A few minutes later, the timer beside us went off, indicating that the hour had passed. The man almost collapsed at this moment, sagging back in his seat and bleeding raggedly. I went to help him, and he held up a hand, dismissing me. Before I could say anything, he cried out, "Thank you," and repeated the same multiple times between breaths. He started to cry again, although these tears seemed to be from relief, or maybe even joy. After a few minutes of this, he recovered himself and sat upright in his chair. He gestured to the box and said, "The money is yours. You're free to go. Thank you sincerely for accompanying me during this time, for noticing me. Please take the money and leave this place. I'll be leading myself out soon enough." Despite the utterly bizarre experience, I didn't want to ask any questions. The migratory horde of partiers had scared the shit out of me, but I didn't want to remain in the home any longer than I had to. I grabbed the money and pocketed it, not bothering to count it, and walked away, waving behind me as I went. I made my exit as quickly and quietly as possible. I closed the door, relieved that I hadn't heard rushing footsteps ascending the stairs. My friend was still parked outside, right where I left him. I got in the car and let out a heaviest sigh of my relief. Guess he was a no-show, huh? Not surprised. No one just gives away $5,000. What are you talking about? I took the money out of my pocket and showed him. He looked at the money, then to me with an expression of incredulity. "But you were only there for 5 minutes. Did you steal it?" I laughed. The kind of nervous laugh you let out when someone says something extremely odd, or after you just survived some perilous situation. In my case, either one could have been the case. I eventually composed myself and said, "What are you talking about? I was in there for an hour. The money was in a locked box with a timer set for the exact amount of time." My friend's expression went from disbelief to worry, and he pointed to the clock on the radio. I remembered what time it had been when I left the car, and saw that only 5 minutes had passed. I stared at the clock, and then turned my gaze to the money, as it would somehow reconcile the disparity in perceptions of time. "What exactly happened in there?" he asked, this softly, which made me feel even worse. I didn't want him to think I was crazy or that I hurt somebody and stole the money, but to avoid the former suspicion, I couldn't tell him what actually happened. I looked around at first at the house and the rest of the neighborhood, but saw no excessive cars, which would have accounted for the presence of the partiers. Also, it was noon on a Tuesday, not exactly the prime circumstances for a party. "Please just drive. I want to get away from the house. Not until you tell me what happened." Firmer, but yet confrontational. I took a moment to reconsider my opinions, my options, then told him a version of the truth that didn't make me sound crazy. I didn't mention anything about the roving crowd of people. I told him about the experience with the man and said it must have been longer than it really was, or maybe he had set the timer wrong. My friend listened quietly, and once I'd finished, he sat silent for a minute, staring at the house through my window. I thought he was going to accept my answer, but without saying a word, he got out of the car. Before I could stop him, he jogged across the lawn and went to the house. I should have gone in with him, but my nerves prevented me from re-entering. He returned a few minutes later, silently entering and starting the car. Well, I really meant it. Well, what did he say? It was empty, completely empty. Nobody was inside. There wasn't even a single piece of furniture. He pulled away from the curb and started driving down the street. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing, and he dropped me off at the house without saying another word. I don't know what happened to me in that house, but the money is real. I have already used some of it to buy food. My friend didn't want anything of it. I can understand that, I guess. I don't know what he believes. I don't There's no way I would have been able to gather 5K together. Certainly not for some prank. Regardless of the truth, the money is real, and for that, I'm thankful. Wow, that was pretty eerie. Good story. Nice. If you enjoyed it, please consider hitting that like down below. And if you enjoy this type of content and want more, please subscribe for more content. I know the reading was kind of choppy. Next time I'm gonna try to read the story beforehand so I get a sense of what voices and how to narrate the story to get a better listening experience. So yeah, in the future it'll be much better. I plan to do one video every single